You forfeit the antiques, my brother said, and he didn't even put down his fork. He just slid a sheet of paper across the table at me, the way you'd slide a check to someone who'd been hassling you. I had Mom's stuff appraised and consigned last month. We needed the liquidity for the gala deposit, and frankly, you weren't using any of it. I sat there with my hand still on my coffee mug. The mug had a chip on the rim. I'd been drinking out of that chip for 2 years because it was the only thing in his house that felt like mine. You sold Mom's piano, I said. It came out flat. I wasn't even sure it was a question. It was taking up the whole sunroom. He finally looked at me then, and his eyes had that bored, irritated patience he used on waiters who got the order wrong. Bryn was redoing that room for the foundation's spring shoot. Honestly, you should be thanking me. That thing was just collecting dust and giving you something to mope over. His wife was on the sofa behind him, scrolling through her phone, and she let out this little laugh, not even looking up. Like I was a rerun she'd already seen. I looked at the paper. Consignment receipt. The piano, my mother's piano, the one she taught lessons on for 30 years to pay our mortgage, had gone for $1,100 to a dealer in Scottsdale. I didn't cry. I want you to understand that, because the woman I used to be would have cried. She would have apologized for being upset. She would have said something like, "I just wish you'd asked me first," in that small, careful voice that begged not to make things worse. But I'd run out of that voice somewhere in the last decade, and I just didn't know it yet. It was almost midnight when he came into the guest room. Phoenix had been buried under a heat dome for 9 straight days, the kind where the news anchors stand outside frying eggs on the sidewalk for B-roll, and even at midnight the air outside felt like opening an oven. His house had the AC cranked so low I slept under 2 blankets. He flicked the light on without knocking. He had a black contractor bag in one fist, the heavy-duty 40-gallon kind. He dropped it on the foot of the bed. "You need to be out by morning," he said. "Bryn's sister is flying in, and she needs the room. I packed your stuff." I sat up. "Marcus, it's almost midnight. Where am I supposed to go? You've got the warehouse." He shrugged like he was doing me a favor. "Dad's old place off Grand Avenue. It's just sitting there. Go play house in it." He gestured at the bag with his chin. I grabbed what I could. "You can sort the rest from there. And get the locks changed on that dump while you're at it. The city's been sending notices." I looked at the bag. He hadn't packed it. He'd scooped the top layer of my closet into it like he was bagging leaves, and a sleeve was hanging out the side where he'd cinched it shut without folding anything. I'd lived in his house for 3 years. 3 years of being the one who waited for the plumber, who sat with his kids when the nanny called in sick, who covered the property tax on Dad's warehouse out of my own checking account because we can't lose the family building, can we? And my whole life fit in one bag a man could carry with one hand. He left the door open when he walked out. I heard him in the hallway telling Bryn it was handled, and her saying something about whether I'd taken the good towels. I sat there for a count of 10, then I got up and pulled my jeans on. Here's the thing nobody tells you about hitting bottom. It's quiet. There's no soundtrack. There's just you putting your boots on at midnight, deciding whether you're going to keep being the person things happen to. I picked up the bag. It weighed almost nothing. I walked down his marble hallway past the framed magazine cover of him, Phoenix's 40 under 40, smiling that smile, and I let myself out the front door. The heat hit me on the porch like a wall. I'd called a rideshare and the guy didn't say a word the whole 20 minutes, just glanced at the contractor bag in his trunk and decided not to ask. I watched the strip malls and the dark stucco subdivisions slide by, and somewhere on the 10 I stopped feeling sorry for myself, and something else clicked over instead. I run distribution for a regional grocery chain. Have for 6 years. My whole job is looking at a system that's bleeding money and finding the leak, where the inventory's walking off. Why a route that should take 4 hours is taking 6. I don't get emotional about it. I pull the data and I follow it until it tells me the truth. So somewhere on the freeway I stopped thinking about Marcus as my brother. I started thinking about him as a vendor who just defaulted on every term of our agreement. And when a vendor does that, you don't beg. You don't ask for an apology. You inventory what's yours, you protect it, and you stop subsidizing them. He thought he'd throw me out. What he'd actually done was end my unpaid contract with him. He just didn't know it yet. The warehouse sat on a dead block off Grand, between a tire shop with the windows soaked over and a lot full of dead semis. My dad ran a custom upholstery and restoration business out of it until his heart gave out when I was 19. After that, it just sat. Marcus put a 4RRSAR sign on the gate years ago, but the sign had bleached to white and curled up at the corners. Nobody was buying anything on that block. The padlock was the same one Dad put on, and my key still turned it. The rolling door screamed when I hauled it up. Inside, the heat was somehow worse, thick and still and smelling like dust and old motor oil and something faintly chemical underneath that I didn't have a word for yet. I used my phone light to clear a spot. Broken pallets, a busted shop vac, paint cans rusted to the floor. I dragged a moving blanket off a pile of junk, shook the dust out of it, and lay down on the concrete with the contractor bag for a pillow. And in the dark, with nothing left to distract me, the math finally caught up. I'm 31. My name is Della, and for the last 12 years I had been the silent partner in a company called Whatever Marcus Wants. It started the week we buried our parents. Mom went first, then Dad 8 months after, like he just couldn't see the point. Marcus was 26 and already had the suits and the handshake and the way of talking to lawyers that made them nod. He sat me down at the kitchen table and said, "I'll carry this, Della. You're a kid, you've got school, let me handle the estate." And I was 19 and I was grateful. God, I was so grateful that somebody wanted to carry something. So the house went into his name. For the financing, it's just cleaner this way. The accounts went into his name. The warehouse went into his name. And somehow, year after year, the bills found their way to me. I remembered the spring the warehouse roof started leaking and the city threatened to condemn it. "We're going to lose Dad's place, Della. Do you want that on your conscience?" I emptied my savings. $4,000 I'd scraped together for a security deposit on my own apartment, and I paid for the roof. I remembered when his first restaurant was going under, and he needed to make payroll just this once, and it was for the family. We're a team. I put it on my credit card. He never paid it back. My score never recovered, which meant I could never get my own lease, which meant I had to keep living wherever he let me. I used to think that was bad luck. Lying on that concrete floor, I finally understood it wasn't luck. It was design. He loved the word we. We're building something. We're in this together. We have to sacrifice now. But I noticed, lying there, that the we had a strange grammar to it. When there was a debt, it was ours. When there was work, it was a family obligation. But when there was a deed, a title, an asset, a magazine cover, the we evaporated and it was always only his. He kept me broke on purpose. A sister with no credit and no savings and nowhere else to go is a sister who answers the phone at midnight when his kids are sick. He didn't sell my mother's piano because he needed $1,100. A man with his cars does not need $1,100. He sold it because he could, because owning the thing I loved and being able to make it disappear was the whole point. The money was just the receipt. I lay there in the heat, and I didn't cry. I felt something cooler than crying. I felt like a person finally reading the fine print on a contract she'd signed at 19. And then a thought drifted up out of nowhere. He never came here. Marcus hadn't set foot in this warehouse in years. He was terrified of it in his way, terrified of grease, of work that left a mark on your hands, of anything that couldn't be photographed for a foundation brochure. To him, this building was a line item, a liability, a tax he resented paying. He'd never walked the floor. He'd never opened a cabinet. He had no idea what was in the corners of a building he'd owned on paper for 12 years. He thought he'd sent me to a prison. What he'd actually done was hand me the only thing of Dad's he'd never bothered to touch. I slept maybe 2 hours. The heat woke me before the sun did. I spent the first few days just surviving and cleaning, partly because the mess was unbearable and partly because moving kept me from spiraling. I swept. I hauled the obvious garbage out to the curb. I found Dad's old shop fans and got 2 of them running off the one working outlet, which barely moved the air but made the place feel less like a tomb. On the 4th day, Marcus showed up. I heard the side door bang, and there he was, in a linen blazer that probably cost more than the truck I couldn't afford, already sweating through it. He looked around the warehouse with his lip curled like he'd stepped in something. He didn't say hello. He threw an envelope at me. It hit my shoulder and dropped. "Take care of that," he said, "today." I picked it up. It was from SRP, the power company. Final notice. The balance due was $3,840. "I've been getting calls from collections about this dump for weeks," he said, dabbing his forehead with the back of his hand. "You're living here now. The utility's in the estate's name, which means it's my name, which means it's my problem, which I do not appreciate. Transfer it, or I'm having the meter pulled." "Marcus, I haven't used anything," I said. "There's no AC. I've got 2 fans running off one outlet. I charge my phone in the car. There's no way this place pulled $4,000 of power." "I don't care what you did. Fix it." He turned to leave, already reaching for his keys, desperate to get back to the climate-controlled cocoon of his car. And the answer's still no on the other thing. I'm selling the lot next month. Tom Whitley's buying the whole block for a self-storage build, so enjoy the squatting while it lasts. He left. I stood there in the heat holding the bill, and I almost did exactly what he wanted. I almost just called and put it in my name to make him stop. But I work in distribution. And the thing about working in distribution is that you can't not read a usage report. It's a reflex. My eyes went to the little bar graph on the back of the statement, the month-by-month consumption chart, the same chart that's on the back of every utility bill in America. And I stopped. Because the bars weren't bars. Normal power use is jagged. It climbs in the day, drops at night, spikes when the AC kicks on, falls when you're asleep. A building's electric usage looks like a heartbeat. This was a flat line. A solid level draw, the same number. Every hour of every day, all month long. No spikes, no dips, no nights, no days. Just constant, steady, heavy consumption, 24 hours a day in a building I knew was empty. That's not somebody leaving the lights on. That's not a forgotten space heater. A flat line at high draw is a machine that never turns off. It's something on life support. I looked up at the silent, dark warehouse. I'd been living in it for 4 days. I hadn't heard a single machine. There was nothing running. There was nothing to run. But the meter doesn't have an opinion. The meter just counts. And the meter said that somewhere inside these walls, something had been quietly eating electricity for years. I went to the breaker panel on the back wall. It was an old grey industrial box, furred with dust. I opened it. Most of the breakers were flipped off, half of them with faded labels, office, shop lights, compressor. But one breaker, down at the bottom, had no label at all. And when I put 2 fingers near it, the metal was warm. It was the only live circuit in the building, and it wasn't feeding anything I could see. I traced the conduit out of the panel. It ran up the wall along the ceiling joists, across the whole length of the warehouse, and then dropped down behind a wall of stacked drywall sheets and old shelving units in the far back corner. The corner I'd been meaning to deal with and kept putting off because it was just junk. I started pulling the shelving away, then I dragged the drywall sheets off one by one, and they crashed and threw up clouds of dust that turned the flashlight beams solid. And behind them was a wall, not the cinder block exterior, a stud wall. Drywall, taped and muddied, newer than anything else in the building. Somebody had framed off the back 20 feet of the warehouse and hidden the seam behind a pile of garbage. From the floor, you'd never know the building was longer than it looked. There was a door in it, flush, no handle, painted the same grey as the wall, and around the edge of that door I could feel it. Cold air, a thin, freezing line of it leaking out into the 110-degree dark. My heart was going hard now. I found the edge of the door with my fingernails and got a pry bar from Dad's old tool bench and worked it into the seam. The door popped and a wave of cold rolled out over me, dry and clean and sharp, and with it came a sound, a low, steady, mechanical hum that had been there the whole time, muffled behind the insulated wall. The sound the flat line on the bill had been trying to tell me about. I stepped through. It was pitch black, except for rows of little green LEDs blinking in the dark. Dozens of them, the status lights on a bank of industrial dehumidifiers and climate units lined along the walls. They were the hum. They were the $4,000. They'd been running for years, sealed inside a wall, keeping a room at a perfect 68 degrees, while my brother complained about the bill and never once asked why. I swept the flashlight up, and the beam caught something that didn't belong in a warehouse off Grand Avenue. A wood crate. Climate rated, the kind museums ship in, stamped with handling codes, and next to it, another. And another. A whole back room of them, racked and braced on padded steel shelving, each one tagged with a printed inventory label. I walked to the nearest one. There was a manila envelope zip tied to the handle. I tore it open with shaking hands. Inside was a packing manifest and clipped to it a typed letter on my father's shop letterhead. The date was 3 weeks before he died. My dad didn't just reupholster furniture. I knew that vaguely, the way you know things about your parents without ever really sitting with them. He restored things, cars mostly, but also furniture, and in his last years, when his hands started shaking too much for the heavy work, he'd gotten into something quieter. Provenance. Authentication. He had an eye. People in a very small, very rich world trusted that eye. The manifest listed the contents of the crates, and the letter, in my father's careful all-caps handwriting that I would have known anywhere, explained the rest. He'd taken a final consignment, a collection. An estate out of Paradise Valley had brought him a set of pieces to authenticate and restore, and broker quietly, the way these things move, without ever touching a public showroom. He'd built the climate room himself to hold them while the deal came together, and then his heart had given up before it closed. The collection was still here. It had been sitting in a sealed room behind a fake wall for 12 years on life support, paid for every month by a power bill my brother resented, and I'd been covering half my life without knowing what it kept alive. I pried the lid of the first crate. Inside, packed in archival foam, was a painting. I'm not going to pretend I knew what I was looking at. I'm a logistics manager from Phoenix, not an art history major, but I knew it was old, and I knew it was beautiful, and I knew, from the way my father's letter described the collection, that I was very much out of my depth. I did not call Marcus. I did not call the power company. I called a man named Sol. Sol was a freight broker I'd worked a nightmare contract with 3 years back, moving a container of temperature-sensitive lab equipment cross-country when the original carrier folded mid-route. Sol handles the cargo nobody else will touch. High value, fragile, complicated. He doesn't ask questions, and he knows exactly what things are worth, which, in my experience, are two qualities that tend to come together. He showed up an hour later in a plain white van, looked at the soaped-over tire shop and the dead semis and my father's crumbling warehouse and said, "Della, you told me you had a cargo problem. This looks like a tetanus problem." "It's not the building," I said. "It's what's in the building. Come look." I walked him back through the hole in the wall. He stepped into the cold room and I watched his whole posture change. He stopped being a guy doing a favor and became very, very still. He went down the row of crates with a flashlight and a pair of cotton gloves he produced from his jacket like a magician. He read the manifest. He cross-checked the letter. He carefully lifted the foam on 3 of them and looked, and on the 3rd one he made a sound, a quiet exhale that I have never heard a man make before. "Della," he said, and his voice wasn't steady. "Do you know whose estate this came out of?" "I know the name on the letter." He told me the name. It meant nothing to me. He explained who they'd been, an old desert money family, copper and land, and what their private collection had been rumoured to hold before it scattered after the patriarch died and was never fully accounted for. He told me that 2 of the pieces in my father's crates were on a list of works that the art world had for decades simply assumed were lost. Lost, he said, not destroyed. There's a difference, and the difference is worth everything. He stood up and pulled the gloves off finger by finger. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Does anyone else know these are here?" "No," I said. "He thinks it's a warehouse full of garbage. He's selling the building next month." Saul was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What's the building worth?" "He's getting $400,000 for the lot, to a storage developer." Saul laughed, but there was no humor in it. He laughed the way you laugh when the number is so absurd it physically escapes you. The building, he said slowly, is the cheapest thing in this building. Della, conservatively, what you're standing in front of, authenticated, brokered properly, quietly, to the right people, the way your father clearly intended. You're looking at somewhere north of $9 million. And that's me being careful. The 2 lost pieces alone, if the attribution holds, could double that at the right auction. I had to sit down. I sat on a crate worth more than every house on the block combined, and I put my head between my knees. Marcus was selling the building for $400,000 to pay off $200,000 in debt I'd half-funded. He was throwing away $9 million because he was too proud to walk across a dirty floor. And here is the part where I stopped being the woman things happened to. I didn't gloat. I didn't gloat him up and scream. Screaming was a luxury for people who'd lost. I was about to win, and winning is quiet. I went and looked at the deed situation, and Sol put me in touch with a lawyer, a real one, the kind who reads everything twice. And what we found was this. The estate had been settled 12 years ago in a way that was sloppy and arrogant, and entirely characteristic of my brother at 26. The real property, the buildings, the land, those were clean, in his name, ironclad. He'd made sure of that, but the contents of the warehouse had never been inventoried, never appraised, never assigned. In the original estate documents, in Marcus's own rush to claim everything that looked valuable and ignore everything that looked like work, the warehouse had been transferred as, and I am quoting the document, the building and any debris, fixtures and discarded materials contained therein, of negligible value. He had legally defined the collection as garbage, in writing, 12 years ago, to save himself the cost and effort of an inventory. My lawyer asked me how I wanted to play it. I thought about my mother's piano going for $1,100 to a stranger in Scottsdale. I thought about a contractor bag at the foot of a guest bed. I thought about the word we. I said, let's let him sell the building. So I waited. I kept the cars I didn't have and the power on I'd been blamed for, and I said nothing. Marcus closed on the lot the following month. I know because he texted me, unprompted, a photo of the check with the message, some of us build, some of us squat, out by the 30th. I texted back, congratulations, and I meant it. He just sold me a $9 million collection for the price of an empty building, and he'd thrown in the satisfaction for free. Tom Whitley, the storage developer, took possession on the 1st. His demo crew showed up to gut the interior, and his crew found a sealed climate room behind a false wall, full of museum crates, and Tom Whitley, who was not an idiot, immediately stopped all work and called a lawyer, because a man who builds storage units knows exactly what it means when there's a room nobody disclosed. That's when it got loud, but it didn't get loud for me. Marcus had sold the building and any debris, fixtures, and discarded materials contained therein. His own words from his own estate filing, the language he'd chosen to avoid the cost of an honest inventory. Tom Whitley's lawyers argued the contents conveyed with the sale. Marcus's lawyers argued the contents were never his to sell because, well, here's where it got beautiful. My father's consignment letter and manifest established that the collection had never belonged to the estate at all. It was held in trust, on consignment, for a third party. My father had documented every bit of it, because my father was a careful man who restored broken things properly, the exact opposite of his son, and the only person with standing to represent that consignment, the only living heir to the man who'd held it, the only person with the paperwork and the chain of custody and the manifest in her own father's hand, was me. The sister he'd put out at midnight with one bag. It took 14 months. I'm not going to pretend it was keen or fast, but when it was over, the courts found that the collection was never part of the estate sale, that it belonged to the consignment my father had documented, and that as his sole heir, the right to broker it and the proceeds my father would have earned ran to me. Marcus got nothing, worse than nothing. He'd sold the building, so he didn't even have the $400,000 anymore, and he'd spent a fortune in legal fees fighting a manifest written in his own dead father's hand. The collection sold, quietly, the way Dad meant it to people whose names I'll never say out loud. The 2 lost pieces went for more than Sol guessed. I'm not going to tell you the final number. I'll just tell you it was the kind of number that changes the grammar of your whole life. I didn't buy a mansion. I bought a controlling stake in the distribution company I'd been making rich for 6 years, and now I sign the checks instead of cashing them. I bought back a piano, not Mum's, that one was gone, but a good one, an upright, and I had it put in a small house with a yard, the first thing that's ever been only mine, in my name, the deed in my hand. Marcus called me once after the verdict. His foundation had quietly dissolved. Bryn had quietly relocated. He wanted to talk about family, about how we should handle this as a we. I let him get the whole word out. We. Then I told him the thing I'd figured out on a concrete floor in a heat wave, the thing that took me 12 years and one black contractor bag to learn. We was always just the name he gave, the things he was taking from me. And then I hung up, and I went and played something on the piano, badly, with the windows open, in a house where nobody would ever again decide what I was worth, and then sell it while I slept. The thing I keep coming back to, even now, is how long I sat on that concrete floor before I let myself see clearly. 12 years. Marcus didn't take everything from me in one night. He took it one we at a time, one favor, one bill, one apology I owed him for being upset that he'd hurt me. And the reason it worked for so long wasn't that he was clever. It's that I kept believing the version of myself he needed me to be. The grateful one. The small one. The one who paid for the roof and never asked whose name was on the deed. What I understand now is that everything that happened to him he built with his own hands. He defined that collection as garbage in writing because he couldn't be bothered to do an honest inventory. He never walked the warehouse floor because the work was beneath him. He sold a $9 million room for the price of an empty building because his pride wouldn't let him check. Nobody did that to Marcus. He spent 12 years setting a trap for himself, and all I had to do, in the end, was stop standing in front of it. Causes have effects. He just never thought the effects would find him. But I don't want you to walk away thinking the lesson is revenge, because it isn't. The reason I won wasn't that I outsmarted him, it's that I refused to become him. When I had the manifest in my hand, and the lawyer asking how I wanted to play it, I could have lied, hidden things, cut corners the way he always did. I didn't. I documented every piece the way my father had, honestly, in the open, because the truth was the only weapon I needed, and it was already mine. That's the part I'd give to anyone sitting on their own cold floor tonight. You need 3 things, and you need all 3. You need to stay decent, because the day you start cheating to beat a cheater, you've already lost the only thing that was ever really yours. You need to keep your head clear enough to read what's in front of you, the flat line on the bill, the language in the contract, the difference between lost and destroyed, because the answer is almost always sitting in plain sight, waiting for someone patient enough to look. And you need the grit to get up off the floor and put your boots on at midnight, because being right doesn't save you. Only standing up does. Marcus had money and charm and a magazine cover, and he ended with nothing, because he had none of those 3. I had a contractor bag and a chipped mug, and I have a piano in a house with my own name on the deed, so check the meter, read the fine print, and the next time someone tells you you're worth less than a bag they can carry with one hand, don't argue. Just remember they've never once looked behind the wall.